Hello, I'm Caroline Fairchild, and welcome to Working Together Live, a show about equity in the workplace with the leaders changing the face of business. For the first time in history, there are 5 generations together in U.S. workplaces. That reality is filled with opportunity, but also could be fraught with challenges. Some studies show almost 65% of workers say have experienced age-based discrimination. How can companies leverage the power of multi-generational workplaces? Joining me now to discuss is Gerhardt. She is the author of new research on ageism in the workplace. She's a professor of management and leadership at Miami University. She's also the director of leadership at the Miami University Farmer School of Business and a co-director at the Isaac and Oxley Center for Business Leadership. She got her BA in psychology from the University of Iowa and a PhD in organizational behavior and human resource management from the Tippie College of Business. Megan, welcome to Working Together Live.
Thank you, Caroline. It's great to be here.
It's so great to have you here. As we were discussing before the show, this is such a big topic on LinkedIn. So I'm sure we have many members in the stream who are excited to hear from you right now and will probably have questions later on. Let's just start with you. What inspired you to devote so much of your career to this topic?
The origin story that I always tell is that when I started here at the university, I had just turned 26 years old. So I was a 26-year-old professor. Which meant I had a lot to learn about a lot of things. And as most people do, I really leaned into my older colleagues for advice and help and found that very, very valuable. But I was uniquely really close in age to my students, much closer in age to my students than many of my colleagues at that time. And so I found myself really asking them for input, feedback, things like that, and found the learning there was just as important difference input, but very valuable. And so it very quickly became a career learning strategy for me to really appreciate and embrace the generational differences that could lead to different kinds of input. And so I became interested, having my degree in organizational behavior and in psychology, really understanding how other organizations were benefiting for this kind of knowledge diversity. And I found out pretty quickly that they weren't, that my positive view on this was unfortunately not shared very widely. It was a time in which millennials were just starting to enter the workplace. So about 20 years ago. And so mostly what we saw there was a lot of frustration more so than excitement. And so I became passionate about both studying this from an academic lens, understanding the nature and the complexity of some of these differences, but then also about changing this conversation. Why is age and generation not studied more frequently as a valuable kind of difference? And then also, why, when we do talk about it, is it a negatively framed conversation?
I want to get to some of the differences between age and generation and the work that you've done, but I got to turn the tables again on you. A 26-year-old professor, I don't think I had one of those in my days at Duke. Did you feel like you were treated differently? Do you feel like you experienced some of that tension, particularly since your students were so close in age to you?
I think at first I was questioning, would I be considered credible? Would I be taken seriously, specifically by my students, not maybe looking like the traditional professor? I now these days, sort of yearn for when I was 26 years old. But I think back then I also looked quite young and did have concern that I need to try to act in a way that maybe channeled someone older. And I realized really quickly that particularly with this generation that we were teaching then, millennials and now Gen Z, they don't assess credibility based on age. I think it used to be in the past that we would associate age and expertise automatically. It was sort of a given. You're older than me. I defer to you. You are an expert. I'm going to just assume that's true. As generations have evolved, that you can be an expert in things at a very young age now that maybe wasn't possible before, digital being obviously the most immediate example. And so I realized my students were not assessing whether I was credible based on how old I was, because they were very credible in a lot of things, of course. And I think that really helped me realize that maybe part of my strength or my opportunity as a teacher was my ability to connect with them, kind of bridge that gap, be a younger person. And even though I'm not so young anymore, or not as young as I used to be, I've really kept that in mind, right? That there is value in their perspective and their experience, just as there is every generation.
Right. That's such an interesting point, because you could look at it on the positive side and say now millennials are not assessing age and credibility in the same token. But then you could also look at it in the bad side, and that maybe they're looking at more experienced colleagues and questioning their credibility, particularly in industries that are skewing much younger. I'm thinking of tech in particular. Have you thought about that, how that has changed over the generations? We had one member on LinkedIn write on a post, I think that the generations see credibility and age much differently. Are you seeing that too?
Yes. So the thing that really stood out to me in doing this research was younger generations care most about or more about connection when determining credibility. Like, yes, this person seems smart. Yes, this person seems to have good character and experience, but they also can connect with me, and they understand how to communicate. And that was more and more important for younger generations compared to older ones. But based on your question, what we've seen is a shift in what's called power distance. So it used to be we had assumed power distance, right? The manager is, in charge. The older person fills that role, and I defer to him or her. And our power distance has shrunk as our generations have evolved, where younger people tend to see less division between themselves and maybe people that are a manager or a supervisor or a leader. Not that we don't want to mistake that with saying they don't respect people who are managers or leaders. I think that is a stereotype, but they see less separation or artificial separation. And so what's happening is a younger person has been raised with a norm. So we're talking, again, millennials and Gen Z largely, a norm to be very proactive. We raised our millennials, for example, to be proactive, to go after what they wanted, that the world was their oyster. We believed in them, and it was the most educated, developed generation we'd ever had, all coming from a really great place. And then when they got to our workplaces and were ready for the world to be their oyster and put up their hand and came into the boss's office to ask for that next big thing, we didn't like it. That seemed very entitled. We weren't allowed to do that. We didn't get the memo that that was okay, but that was a norm we raised them with that suddenly as managers seemed uncomfortable. And so I always say, you have to think of the lens you're using. As a millennial, I might see that as being very proactive. But if I, as a Gen Xer or someone who's a baby boomer, sees that, very easily we could say, well, that's entitled. You don't get to do that. You're not ready for that. We're raised with different norms, and we can very easily then misinterpret.
Right. Well, let's get into some of those norms and then how they translate into discrimination, unconscious or not, in the workplace. A lot of the behaviors that you just described, Megan, I'm not sure how I would bring that up in a performance review. I'm not sure how I would be able to pinpoint that and say they're discriminating against me because of my age. What is the mainstream understanding right now, your run-of-the-mill manager in corporate America, of age discrimination and how it impacts corporate culture?
I think when we do talk about age discrimination, it is specifically the traditional view of older people being denied opportunities based on age. So in the United States, this is obviously different around the world. In the United States, there's no federal protection for age discrimination for anyone under the age of 40. So our protections are designed to protect those of us over 40. Because when that law was designed, the idea was we were the ones that needed protection from discrimination, that opportunities would be taken away. So I think we tend to focus on age discrimination in the legal definition of that. Although, of course, it still exists. We have a lot of startling statistics about the number of people over age 40 who still believe that they are discriminated against because of their age, or they're not getting opportunities that they're very qualified for because of age. Particularly in tech, we've seen that a lot, but other industries as well. We have worked in our work, so we do work on what we call gentelligence, which, not to overstate it, but the idea that we need to champion and understand all generations and what they bring to the workplace in order to leverage that opportunity. That there is ageism in all directions, that we might call it reverse ageism, but if you're under 40, there's no federal protection for you. So if you're denied an opportunity because someone perceives you as being too young, there's no law that says that's not acceptable, because traditionally we haven't ever thought we needed to protect younger people. There was an article, I believe it was in the Human Resource Management Journal, that found that kind of age discrimination, reverse age discrimination, is just as, if not more frequent, but it's maybe not talked about, or as you said, how would you prove that that was going on? And how do you separate experience from age and things like that? It gets very complicated.
And we're looking at some really interesting stats, Megan, that I want to ask you right now. Only 6% of organizations believe leaders can lead a multi-generational workforce. What's behind that stat? Why is that so small?
It's interesting because I ask in this is a Deloitte statistic. And so in a lot of the workshops I've been doing with different companies, I've said, do you believe you're effective? The number is much higher. But then when we flip it and say, do you believe your organization or your leadership knows what they're doing? We consistently see a low number similar to the 6%. I think it really, Caroline, is about the fact that people are not feeling valued or seen for the unique value they bring. And that is why the Great Resignation is happening. People, regardless of age, are feeling like their organization isn't appreciating their unique value. And part of that is the unique experience and expertise you bring to the table because of the time in which you've grown up, the tools you've developed as a part of your, time that you entered the workforce, and the things that you know and learned how to do as a member of your generation. And so I feel like if you don't feel seen, if you're an older person, perhaps you think, I'm being nudged aside in favor of younger people because somehow technology is all anyone cares about. And there's a stereotype that I'm not able to do that. That is an unfounded stereotype. Or if you're a younger person, you may think, they're not interested in change around here. They're only interested in how they've always done it. I don't feel valued for the new perspective I could bring.
Sure. And one of the things I wanted to talk to you about is that, particularly over the last couple of years, there's been such a focus on diversity, equity, and inclusion, particularly within corporate America. And yet age has almost completely been left out of this discussion. I think it's only 8% of organizations actually include age as part of their DE&I strategy. How is that, particularly given how much passion there is about this topic? How many people feel strongly that this is something prevalent that's impacting themselves at work?
It's fascinating, isn't it? I mean, I think that's part of what drives me. One of the reviewers of our book that came out this summer, Gentelligence, said, this is really the missing link. And I think that's part of the reason that I am so driven to have this conversation as many places as I can, is that there's no one who doesn't think this makes sense. Everyone has a strong opinion. Everyone has a story and an experience around this. And yet we've never really pulled it out and said, wait, generation or age, as you said, we'll talk about that those are obviously different but connected things, is present in every workplace. It will be from here on out, right? And it always has been. But yet 6% of organizations feel their leaders are equipped to handle it. Like, that is the generation gap we need to talk about, right? That's really the glaring oversight. And when we think about the fact that we know very well how to manage diversity and inclusion when it comes to other kinds of difference, we have many experts and strategies and things that we are seeing work slowly, but work. But we don't apply those to age. We don't apply them to generation. And that's really the leap that I want us to make. So I think.
And do you see that leap being made, Megan? I saw a big response to your latest HBR article on LinkedIn. I'm assuming that it got some buzz off the platform as well. Do you see this changing? What are the signs that workplaces in particular are taking this issue more seriously?
I'm hopeful slowly. I think there's a couple things driving this that's making it maybe not a choice anymore. The urgency is there, one, because of our demographic shift. So we've of course seen rumblings for a long time that our baby boomers, when they retire, quote unquote, what will we do? Well, now our baby boomers post, sort of the crux of COVID, many aren't retiring, but many are saying, well, I think I'm going to go try something else. I don't feel valued or appreciated in this work environment that I've been in for so long. Baby boomers being traditionally quite loyal as a generation. We see much higher levels of org commitment and loyalty for boomers than Gen X or millennials, for example. But saying, I'm ready for my second act or my third act. I'm going to go somewhere where they're interested in me. And so we're seeing organizations start to realize, for example, that our baby boomer population is a great potential source of talent with a lot of experience, a lot of institutional knowledge and expertise that maybe are looking for new opportunities. So demographically, that's the largest population we're going to have. Our younger population is dwindling, it's decreasing. And so we have to think differently about the value we put on our older workers, how we can continue to keep them highly engaged and give them development opportunities for much longer. This idea that they're going to retire at 65 is very antiquated. Sure. And so why not keep engaging and developing people for as long as they want to stay in the workplace?
Well, Megan, as I predicted, there is a huge discussion in the stream right now about this topic. Bridget says there are more corporations discriminating based on age, especially with the pandemic. The opportunity for corporate America to get rid of anyone over 50. My former company even bragged about it. Bridget, I'm really sorry to hear that. And Judy says there are so many dimensions of diversity and we need to consider age too. Younger people bring a great perspective and help keep us fresh, while the older ones bring experience and layers of insight. We need both to have a well-run business. Judy, that's correct. And I'm sure there are many studies that show that as well. And that's kind of the basis of Megan's work. So Judy and Bridget, thanks for your insights here. Megan, one of the things that we discussed before the show is this difference between age and generation. Let's switch gears a little bit and talk about generations. What makes one generation different than another? What are some common misconceptions about how generations are even formed?
Right. So I think one of the reasons that people sometimes turn off from really seriously considering the role of generational diversity in their workplace is the fact that when we've been exposed to it, it has been a very surface level conversation. It's been through clickbait headlines of articles. It's been through stereotypes, broad sweeping generalizations. And maybe you hear your generation described in a way, Gen X are slackers, millennials are entitled, Gen Z snowflakes, okay, boomer. And you immediately are repelled by that, and rightfully so. And you think that's not me. Or you hear this bullet point list of formative events for, Gen X includes Challenger disaster and the AIDS epidemic and stranger danger. And you sort of roll your eyes. So I think a smarter way to look at this, and as an academic, but also a consultant, I try to really make sure we're pulling from good research and social science here, is to say the most accurate way to think about a generation is as a layer of identity. It's a form of identity, meaning those people who grew up in the same period of time or history as I did, we shared certain things that absolutely have influenced the way we see the world. We have seen, I could give you the whole, I won't because of the time, but in the book, we talk quite a bit about the idea of the narrative of different generations, not a story that's the same for each person, of course, but we're talking about the formative events, what's going on in culture and society and in politics and the economy that impacts the opportunities you're going to have the rest of your life. So if you take the pandemic, we all have experienced, unfortunately, the pandemic, and our Gen Zs, so born 1997 to, we'll say 2012 right now is the official cutoff for Gen Z, they all experienced the pandemic during what's called their formative years. And that means it is going to have a more profound effect on them because it's limiting opportunities. It's changing the trajectory of their childhood or their young adulthood when they're making some substantial life choices about career or education. So we all experience it. They experience it in a deeper way. And so with generations, we try to look for things that we say, this is a shared event that really shaped the formative years of a particular group of people. And therefore, we're going to put them in a cohort of a generation. They develop then tools and norms that help them navigate what's going on in their time. And those are the things they bring with them to work.
Right. Well, let's extend this beyond just the assumptions of okay boomer into the framework that you developed for people to understand generational differences. Obviously, we don't want to just discuss the problems, some of the solutions here. Let's just start with resisting assumptions. You mentioned okay boomer, you mentioned the entitled millennial. I think people know that these stereotypes exist, but going back to what I said earlier around how do you pinpoint these in the office? How do you understand if this is fueling your decisions? What's your advice for someone who wants to know if they're making these assumptions and perhaps even not knowing it?
I think we worked hard to be providing practical strategies around these. Because like I said, I think most people say, yes, it's a problem. Yes, we need to solve it. And we know if we just leave people to their own devices, it's going to be frustrating. We're going to have miscommunication. But not only can we neutralize that, research shows you can actually turn that around, that you can create more productive teams, higher engaged teams, teams with lower turnover that are intergenerational by utilizing a good leadership strategy. So that's what our Gentelligence framework is. It's that strategy. So if we go to the first one, resisting assumptions, the first thing we recommend is an assumption audit. So you can do that for yourself, but you can also do that as a workplace or as a team. And that is just like any other kind of diversity, a conscious raising of your awareness of where am I making assumptions, right? When a younger employee comes into my office to ask for something, a raise, ask when they're going to be ready to be promoted, if they can take on more responsibility, what is my assumption? Is my assumption that they're a real go-getter and the kind of person that we need around here? Or do I think, oh, entitled snowflakes, here they go again? Where are you making those sort of shortcuts in decision making? On the flip side of the age spectrum, I was on a call with an organization last December, and they were talking about their upskilling programs, so training and trying to develop their employees. And I said, well, how many people are we talking about here? And they said, well, we're pretty confident our baby boomers aren't going to be interested. Oof. Right. So you can imagine my reaction, Caroline. I said, oh, resist assumptions, practice one. And I said, well, hold up. Like, why are we making that assumption? Well, Jane told me the other day over coffee that she better not be expected to enroll in this program. I was like, okay, well, Jane's one person. What are we going to lose if I'm an older person and I'm not given the opportunity for training and development? You're operating on a stereotype, and I'm probably going to feel very unvalued, and I'm going to leave. So it's checking implicit and explicit assumptions. Are we only inviting our younger people to join in our social media campaign? Are our younger people not being invited into strategic planning discussions? Where are we kind of falling into some assumptions about who should be at the table? And then maybe the other thing, Caroline, to throw in here that I've seen a lot lately is, the saying, it goes without saying. I found in generational differences, nothing goes without saying. So this can even go to something like, you're talking about flexibility in your current workplace, that we should all be allowed flexibility. Let's dig deeper and not assume we all define flexibility the same way, right? What does that mean to you as a millennial, as opposed to what it might mean to someone who is a baby boomer, for example? So really just dig in beneath to explore meaning and shortcuts.
And of course, the whole point here is to take advantage of the differences between age and generation that can come into the workforce. What's your advice for managers who want to know if that is actually coming to fruition, if they are embracing age diversity in a way that's leading to positive outcomes for their organization?
I think we have to start having the conversation. I am working on, I have something called the Gentelligence Quotient, which is designed to just do a baseline of where are people at. And then that can be looked at a team level and an organization level in terms of, are we doing as well as we think we are? What are some of the blind spots? And then I think it's a matter of really asking people whether they're feeling like their age is considered an asset, right? It's also looking at the norms and the values and the culture we have. So the age climate is what makes a difference as to whether an intergenerational workforce is going to be a train wreck or a real competitive advantage for us as a company. So, we look at things like, do we normalize things like mutual mentoring? That not mentoring and reverse mentoring, because reverse mentoring sounds like there's something very backward about a young person teaching an older person, but mutual mentoring, that it's just as normal for me as a 45-year-old to ask my 23-year-old colleague for their input or their advice on something as it would be for them to ask me. Setting up opportunities for people to ask for a tutorial on something that maybe they're not as familiar with, or finding places where there's that mutual or complementary knowledge or expertise. Expertise belongs to all ages. It's just that we sometimes do have different kinds of expertise. So I think you want to really do an evaluation of your climate. What messages are you sending? Companies that have very rigid views on when someone's allowed an opinion or when someone's allowed an opportunity because you have to work here for X number of years. I think just asking the question of why do we do it that way? Do we do it that way because we really truly have seen that that matters? And if so, that's great. But if we do it that way because we've always done it that way, maybe let's have a conversation about whether that still makes sense or whether we're losing some of our best people, older or younger, because we're relying on just sort of outdated, archaic ways of managing people.
And hopefully a lot of those conversations will lead to some of these numbers budging, like 6% of employees saying that they don't believe that their organizations can do this, manage a multi-generational workforce, or even some of the stats around DE&I efforts focused on age. Megan, this has been such a great discussion. I've learned so much, and I can see from the stream that many of our members have as well. Brianna says, taking a step back to face our own biases, then remembering age is important to diversity and inclusion are good steps toward an inclusive future. Every person deserves a chance and is capable of adding value. I know that you believe that as well, Megan. Thank you so much. If you are joining us in the stream and you haven't checked out Megan's article in HBR, be sure to do so. And I want to thank her for joining us on the show.
Thank you, Caroline. It's been great.
Working Together is not just a live show. It is also a weekly newsletter that hits your inbox every Wednesday morning. For more on equity in the workplace with the leaders changing the face of business, you can subscribe by hitting the link that my producer is sharing in the comments right now. Next week on Working Together Live, Thursday at 3 Eastern, how can we make the workplace more equitable for transgender employees? Activist and cultural organizer Raquel Willis joins us to discuss. I'm Caroline Fairchild. Thank you so much for watching.